introduction. Yes, I've worked in general practice and specialist environments as a practice manager over many years in Melbourne. And during that time, I was also working for what was the divisions, which they call the Primary Healthcare Network, I think is what they're called at the moment, which was when the divisions had a lot of money. So it was great. They had a one-day-a-week role for, I think I was called the Practice Manager Network Program Coordinator, which they just sort of made that up. And it was to basically educate the practice managers and do short courses, etc. But what I rapidly found out from that was that practice managers, by their nature and where they fit into the organisation, sit in a very isolating role. Mainly practice managers here today, would that be fair to say? I don't know if you identify with this or not, but as it turned out with that one-day-a-week role, what I ended up doing over a period of a couple of years, and running into the office, checking your voicemails, etc., was mainly going out and talking to practice managers and touching base with them about often the frustrations they had, and often the fact that they're not one of the reception staff. They can't be one of the reception staff if they want to effectively performance manage them, which you don't always have to do, but you know you always need to do. And they're also not one of the doctors because they're not one of the directors of the business. And I think that's a very relevant point to take home, is that with the professional bodies we have and the education out there, that practice managers need to support each other, and where you can get together and share your experiences, talk to people about what your issues are. Otherwise you see a lot of burnout and a lot of frustration and a lot of managers working a lot more hours than they should. So just to start, I thought if you could just spend 60 seconds popping down on your pads there, what would be the current practice that you're working in, 3 top points, what would be your common goals? Or your director's common goals, or when you were employed at that practice and came for your interview, what did your directors tell you were your common goals, if they did at all? Some people look like they've jotted them down really quickly, and some look like they're struggling. I'm going to come back to that later about the common goal theory, and we're going to tie that into other things. But I think it's a really important message if it hasn't come to you pretty quickly what your common goals of your practice are. This quote was written by Professor Geoffrey Meredith, who wrote a book called The 21st Century Practice Management. It's a fantastic book, and he writes, practice development will not be achieved unless doctors and staff have thought through where the practice is going, document a practice vision and a clear statement of objectives. So there's no right or wrong reasons or common goals that are right or wrong for any particular practice. Some of the bullet points I've put down, which you may share or you may have other points as well, could be quality service, just flat out making money, to be the best, workplace pride, cost sharing is a really important one for a lot of practices, a collegiate atmosphere, one-stop shop, which is often for multidisciplinary, or even under a single specialty when there's other facets of procedures within one practice, and sharing a clinical vision. So I'd like to share with you a story of a practice that I managed in Melbourne for 10 years. And when I took on the position, there were 5 directors. And at our first meeting, I asked the directors would they write down the 3 most important reasons for them being in a partnership together. And I gave them a week between that week and the next meeting. And at the next meeting, 3 of the directors gave me their top bullet points, which were very, very similar. The 4th one said he just wanted to make money, and the 5th one said that he didn't do the homework. So immediately, after being in that practice for only a week, it was immediately clear to me who were the focused partners in the practice, and it was also a multidisciplinary practice, so it was kind of tricky because they weren't all medical specialists. And to cut a long story short, over a period of a month or two, it was very easy then to have the conversation with the fifth doctor who didn't do the homework and who had other business interests. It was very easy for the other directors to say, hey, we want to drive this practice forward in the next 10 years, do you want to be here? And as it turned out, it was easy for him, and he said, well, no, actually, I've got other interests. And so it was a happy conclusion in that we said goodbye to him. Interestingly, the one who had the money focus, and we need to make money, we're running businesses, but his number one focus was money, where it wasn't for the others. He also sold out his share in the directorship, remained as a contractor, still works there today, but has no input into the decision making. So therefore, moving on from that, it was really easy for all of us in the practice. We knew what the common goals were because these three guys shared them. We talked to the staff about what the common goals were. We did work on our mission statement and created a mission statement, which we had not had before. And eventually we ended up changing our name because the practice was named inappropriately for the services that we were providing. So to do that basic exercise, to actually sit and say, why are we here? Or say to your boss, why did you start this practice? What is it you want from this practice? It may seem like a simple question because you all know what areas you're working in, GP, specialists, whatever, what areas of specialty. But to actually know what your motivators are, what their motivators are to drive that practice makes such a difference. So the second point I wanted to bring up today is effective leadership, which is you guys, who's running your practice. Once again, having education in that area, if you can get educated in certain areas, and most of you probably have a high level of education, but a lot of it to do with personalities with the people that you're working with, I think can hone in on already effective leadership skills. I think when you look at personalities, behavioural styles, and there's generally the 4 different behavioural styles, and you may recognise in most of you, if most people would not be in group practices, there wouldn't be many sole practices these days, I wouldn't think. If you have a look at those different styles when you equate to your directors, and I'll read out the 4, which are directive, analytic, conceptual, or behavioural. So if we looked at Paul down the back here, he wouldn't so much be a conceptual person, but he'd be more analytical. So if he was one of our partners, we'd think, right, I'm going to talk to him about profit and loss, I'm going to give him the balance sheet, I'm going to tell him that if we increase the item 23 to $66.65 instead of 65, our increase over a period of time will be this. Whereas if we talk to someone else, say George from the AMA sitting next to him, who's got a totally different style, we've been talking about more rationals, not that Paul's irrational. We'd be talking to George about more rational things, about award rates, about what can we do with the performance managing an employer. If we talk to someone who is more conceptual, we'd be talking about someone who's going to increase our website hits, who's got more of a big picture, more of the out there type of focus. We wouldn't have Paul doing the website, we wouldn't have George doing the accounting. So I think if you can relate to the personalities of the people you work with, and it's not just your directors, but if you can work on evolving a technique of listening to the people that you're talking to, not so much mirroring their style, but if you're trying to get the best out of that person, if you understand what style suits them best, you will do better if you can relate to that style. And I think with our staff, that is a really huge thing. If you can see what makes your staff tick and what sort of person they are, you'll be able to develop them further in your business to best suit you and to suit the business. I put this slide on because it actually reminds me of the story that Paul was talking about. The little chicken on top looks really cute and calm, but underneath his legs are scrambling. And I sometimes feel that some of the managers I come out to see look exactly the same, that they look in control and they look calm and they're letting their bosses know they're calm, which is a sign of good management. We don't want our bosses to think we're stressed to the max. But underneath the water, your little legs are like this because you've just got too much to do, you're staying at work too late at night, and you're not allowing others to take over a bit of the load. So that's something I'd like to share too, that I think it's credible and it's fantastic to be hardworking and to put in 100% for your business. But you also need to look at the risk management side of business. So if something happens to you, are the pieces of the pie in that business able to be covered by someone else? So to necessarily work 13 hours a day and to say, oh, I'm in on Saturday mornings again, and oh no, I can't trust her to do it, that's poor management. That's not effective management. It might mean you look like you're working hard and doing well, but you're actually not covering your business's risk and you're not developing your other potential staff. The third key, talking about the staff, is the team. Patient satisfaction with practice has as much to do with practice environment and treatment by staff as it does to do with clinical treatment by doctors. I think one of the other speakers mentioned that an adverse experience at the desk can heavily flow onto the patient's perception of what your practice is. So if you can develop the motivators, establish the motivators and the drivers for your staff, performance appraisals, good induction process. The induction process is made very helpful when you have common goals, because at your induction you're sitting and saying to this receptionist, we are a sort of clinic. What's important to us here is that we have blah, blah, blah. This is very, how you present is important, whatever the important things for your practice may be, and they may differ from practice to practice. That needs to be made clear to your staff at induction. Really utilise your trial periods, because you guys know this. You are managers, you know how to recruit, you know how to hire. If your gut tells you after a little while that I just don't feel right about her, address it immediately. Don't go over your periods for your trial. At the time you interview them, make it clear, articulate it, that we're having a trial here to see if there's mutual suitability. Do you like us? Do we like you? Be upfront with the people, and if you're feeling you're not that confident about that person, have reviews every couple of weeks. How do you think you're going? So to be a little bit more transparent, rather than a lot of the practices that I come into, you come in when everything's just fallen to bits and the manager's saying, oh, I don't know how to deal with that girl, she's just been like this for ages, she's never doing what we want her to do. And they've kind of let it a little. I've never been into one quite that bad.
That's a good practice manager's job.
Yeah, quite that bad. But I certainly have been into practices as a consultant, and I'd love to give another example, which I won't tell you where, but it was a specialist who was wanting to continue with his work, but his work was getting very quiet. He'd been there 17 years, I think. Single operator, specialist, one PA receptionist. She'd been with him for 17 years as well. He said, I don't know why I'm getting so quiet. I want to work another 10 years. I've got really good health. I'm very well trained. I don't want to give up now. So I said, okay, I'll come in and talk to your receptionist, medical, PA, whatever. Spoke to her and I said to her, look, he wants to work for another 10 years. How do you feel? And she said, I'm just over it. I'm sick of it. She's in her late 40s, had parents that both had health issues. There's a lot going on in her life outside her job, which he was aware of. And she said, I just think he should retire. She said, oh, okay. So, and I did sort of put to her that he actually didn't want to retire and it actually was his business and not hers. And as it ended, over her parents, one of her parents actually got sicker, and because I was in there sort of pushing, for improvement, and he wanted they didn't have a computer system, it was really, so there was a lot of change required, and she wasn't happy to adapt to that change, so it made it very clear that it was time to move. So that was about April, I think, last year, and I ran that practice in December because we recruited and found a girl who was full of energy, and he emailed me at one point and said, oh my God, I think she's a bit too much for me. So he's gone from one extreme to the other. And then in December when I rang them just to say Merry Christmas, whatever, they're fully booked. So no one can tell me that front desk person cannot make or break your business. So that's, I think, a wonderful example of it. So this is the ideal practice, just as a bit of a contrast. So bringing it all together, I think if you can find out what makes your organisation tick if you don't already know. But I also think it's just a really good thing when you come back from these things and you're a little bit inspired and learned a bit and the director say, oh yeah, where'd you go this morning, whatever. Just ask them, if you don't already know, what are the common goals? Ask them separately, and it'd be really interesting for you if you see that one director over another has a totally different goal. So continually educate yourself is the other thing, like just with the simple thing with the characteristics, that's not practice management stuff, that's just people stuff. You know, Google it, I can't remember what the acronym for it is, but you know, they teach it in all the psych stuff. But just understanding personalities can actually help you to be more effective in your communication, to get the best out of people. And recruit wisely to get your team together and monitor it closely. Don't be scared to have the hard conversations with your staff, and recognise the type of people that your staff are and develop the characteristics in your staff that they have indicated they would like to develop. Because that can be, in another example, I've seen practices where a staff member might be taking over someone else's job for a while she's sick or something, and no one's ever asked her, are you really interested in doing this, my old stuff? Because you've never asked, they've never said, and then when you get to the bottom of it and say what drives you, and they say, oh, I love doing this stuff. If you don't talk to your staff and ask them, they may not tell you. And a lot of people are like that. They just potter along in their own area, and there could be a lot of facets to those staff that could be actually enhancing your business in other ways. Thank you.